Hello everybody, welcome back to the AdvancedVape channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the AZEROTH RDTA from COILART. So this is sort of one of those modern Genesis style tanks, kind of COILART's answer to the Limitless Plus. That's this right here. So this tank is 24 millimeter, 4 milliliter capacity. And it's got a few different changes and I would say refinements from the Limitless Plus, which in my mind is its closest competitor. So all of these modern style Genesis devices they work a lot better than older, the original kind of Genesis devices, which I have never been a fan of. Just on the outside, if you take a quick look and compare with the Limitless Plus, the main difference is going to be that airflow, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And when you go inside of it, the difference in the posts, the deck structure, is the other main difference. So this is a kind of a velocity style, sort of, 2-post, 2-terminal, and the AZEROTH is kind of a goon style with plates providing tension on the coils. And so that's the main difference. Other than that, they're fairly similar. They both have the same fill port and design on the wicking and all of that kind of stuff. It's just that modern Genesis style that we're seeing a lot of right now. But this is kind of COILART's take on it, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I feel about that once we get through all of the wicking and all that kind of stuff. So I've already got a build on here. This is staggered build in stainless steel, and it's already fired and ready to go. And so I'm going to move on to wicking. Before I do that, real quick, I'll talk about the drip tips that come in the box. So pre-installed on there is going to be this drip tip, which is a wide bore, just straight drip tip, no angle or anything. And it also comes with an adapter if you want to use your own. I wasn't really a big fan of the straight one, so the one that I have on there right now is the one that comes in the package when you first get it, and it's got a conical shape to it. So it's kind of hard to see on camera, but it tapers outwards as it goes up. And I prefer that for flavor, so that's the one I have on here right now. And I'm going to go on and take this section off. It just unscrews and takes the glass with it. It screws onto these threads right there. And we're going to go on and do the wicking really quick. I'm going to be using rayon for this. Okay, so as you can see, I'm leaving the legs nice and long here. And really, you just got to come at this from a different perspective as a typical RTA. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get it assembled. But for right now, I'm going to leave the legs pretty long to right about here. And go all the way around and cut. And then I'm going to fluff it out a little bit. This rayon's already pretty fluffy, so I don't have to do it too much, but if you're using cotton, you might want to do this a little bit more. And now I'm just kind of put the cotton into those little channels, at least get them in that direction. They're not going to stick in those channels unless you wet it down. And then I'm going to put the top on. And this part's really important. You don't want to stop it right there where that leg is. You want to try and tighten it up as best you can to be in between those legs. And then you want to get your tweezers and kind of move them to the side. Make a space in there, and that'll really help you out later when you go to fill it. Make as big of a gap in there as you can. And what I like to do is just make a tiny little gap in there in the channel. Nothing big, just a little tiny gap. As small as you can make it. And now I'm just pushing it up to make sure that there's no tension downwards. So this works a little bit better if you wet the cotton down first, but it ends up being really messy, so I didn't want to do that on camera. So I just put it in there dry, but at this point you're going to want to saturate the cotton. And you've got a lot of cotton there, so you're going to have to keep adding juice for a little while. Okay, and now I'm going to use this fill port here. I'm just going to double check that I have a gap in there. This side fill port can be a little bit tricky, and you can't fill it up too fast, especially if you're using Max VG. So I just put the needle off to one side there and just slowly squeeze it in. If you put it in the middle, it's going to have trouble air trying to get out of there, because air needs to escape for the juice to go in. So I'm going to stop there to kind of show what exactly I'm talking about. As you can see, there's a gap there, and there's no kind of mechanism to get the juice up to the cotton. The cotton stops right at the top of that glass, just about there. And so when you're using it normally, there's nothing to make that juice contact the cotton. So on a normal RTA, you would have a vacuum that kind of pulls the juice into the cotton, and that doesn't really exist in this style, in this Genesis style. It relies on gravity to make that feed happen. So that's why people talk about kind of Genesis lean, like leaning sideways or holding it at a sharp angle to make the juice make contact with the wick, and that was always the traditional problem with the older style Genesis, is wick speed. It's very difficult to get it wigged just right, to get it to be fast enough to have flavor and to not have burnt hits and all of that kind of stuff. But this modern style Genesis, it's kind of a different situation, but it still exists there. It's still an issue that there's juice down here and no direct contact unless you're turning it upside down. So it's just something to be aware of, that the entire function of this tank is different than what you may be used to if you're used to using RDAs. Real quick, I'll talk about the airflow. It's different than the Limitless Plus, which I showed just a minute ago, and that's just a straight Cyclops airflow. And this is kind of a diagonal, I guess you could call it a mutation style. And the advantage of this is that ideally the air is hitting the coil at different points, because it has a little bit of a vertical slant to it. Whereas with the Cyclops, it's coming straight in at that one horizontal line. And I typically have it 2 open and 1 closed, and you rotate this to open and close it. And so what you want to do is just line up your airflow with your coils. And I generally just tip it upside down and let the juice fully saturate the coils from the bottom before I start using it. Now with those little tiny channels that we put in there, you don't want to just leave it like this. It will eventually leak, but that should be good enough to have these saturated. So if you take a look, those wicks are pretty saturated. I can't hold it upside down with this off to show you because it'll leak out the fill port, but it does refill faster than you think that it would. So I think we're ready to use it now. And the whole lean thing that I was talking about, that's sort of people vaping it like at this angle, kind of to make contact with the cotton, holding it at this kind of angle. And I don't typically do that. I just kind of hold it right here. You know, just a normal, comfortable angle. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. I'm vaping this at 87 watts. The very first thing that you notice is that this is very airy. So I have it with one of those little air hole things closed to open, and it still feels very, very airy. So it's the same way with the Limitless Plus. They're both very airy, and they feel like a dripper. It just has that dripper feel to it, the way that the vape feels, which is a good thing. It's not an oversaturated dripper like you just filled it. It's sort of in that second one, and you've heard me say that before in the second vape, and that's kind of where you want to be as far as saturation. So really good dripper style flavor. I wouldn't say that it's the best flavor out of any of the tanks that I have or have shown before, but it's right up there with any of the drippers that I own. I have a preference towards RTAs, so I prefer the flavor off of some of those to a dripper, but if you like that dripper feel, this will be really familiar to you. It feels a lot like something like the Goon or one of those style drippers. So now that I've taken a few really big vapes off of it, I just usually turn it upside down just for a second, and really that's all you need. This modern style Genesis has changed a lot as far as wicking speed. It wicks far faster than you think that it would. Kind of my intuition going into trying these Genesis style devices is that wicking was going to be an issue, and it's kind of proven me wrong. It's really not a concern. You do have to keep in mind that you know, standing right here, the juice isn't making contact with the cotton, but if you're using it at a sharp angle or you give it an upside down turn every now and then, it's fine. And now it's back to being fully saturated. This seems to me like a perfect fit for someone who likes drippers or that dripper experience but wants some extra capacity, doesn't want to have to refill it constantly, which is why I lean away from drippers. It gets old having to re-drip constantly if there's tanks that provide that performance. And this is at that level for me. It's right at that dripper level. And it stays saturated, has good flavor, and you're right up next. You know, the coils are right there, so you're right up next to it. And something that was pointed out to me that it's not an issue for me, but for other people it might be. This type of tank is great for people who live at high elevations or they travel and change elevations throughout the day. So any tank that relies on vacuum is going to be a big problem for that type of person. It'll cause major leaking because of the pressure changes just outside if you're traveling, changing elevation as you travel or whatever. And that's not an issue with this Genesis style. So kind of a limited appeal, I guess, but that's a big deal if you're one of those people. I'm not, but I've heard from people that are, that it makes a huge difference and means that they can use this tank instead of just drippers. Yeah, overall, I'm very surprised by the performance level of these modern style Genesis, and if you put it just straight up head to head, same build and everything with the Limitless Plus, I'm gonna choose this one basically entirely because of that airflow. The different build decks, that's a preference thing. The Goon build deck, some people would think it was easier than the Velocity deck, and that's just a preference thing. It's not easier or harder to me, it's just different, and that's not really enough to push me in one direction or the other, but that airflow makes a big difference to me. To me, this provides much better flavor and performance than just this normal Cyclops style airflow. A lot of us here tried this tank and really were surprised by it and liked it, and that's why we decided to pick it up. We don't typically sell too many tanks, and we typically only sell ones that we really like. So this won out from the Limitless Plus for me and for all of us here. Overall, if you're looking for a dripper kind of experience, it's a really good choice if you don't want to have to re-drip constantly. So like I said, it doesn't have the best flavor that I've ever had, but it's really good. It's really at that dripper level. I haven't tried any drippers that I would say outright beat this on flavor and in clouds and all that. Yeah, just overall a good dripper type experience. That'll bring us to the end of this video about the AZEROTH RDTA from COILART. If you like this video on our channel, give us a like and subscribe to our channel. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them below in the comments or send me an email. Thanks.